Well, we're back. And as you can imagine, the CTO design team has been busy and working with you, the members of the FiRe community, to provide input on the CTO design challenge. And what we're here to do is to report out and report to not only to the community, but also to Mark, our judge, on our findings and the information that we put together on ideas to address the challenge. So
perhaps before we go any further, for those 4 people in the room who weren't here at the beginning, I should again refresh the list of the requests that I made to this group.
Okay, very good.
And I'll add the opening sentence, which I didn't do the last time around. So this is a direct quote from the email that I sent to the group through Larry Smar a few weeks ago. We are asking you to create a new field of medicine called Nutritional Microanalysis, based on discovering, studying, sharing, and using the chemical components of what we eat and drink. A successful solution to this challenge will include, number 1, describe the field and its hoped for benefits. Number 2, how will this information be developed? Number 3, what human or other resources will be needed? Number 4, can we create a technical platform for the discovery and study of this field? Number 5, how can we incorporate your findings into the study of human health, the quantified self, and future medical practice? And number 6, how can FiRe participants assist in this set of tasks?
So with that, we will proceed with our report out. So in summary, our design challenge is as follows and has been identified by Mark in the details. Based on discovering, studying, sharing, and using the chemical components of what we eat and drink is the baseline of what we're here to solve and address. Missing in our formation today, due to personal need, is our Larry Smar, who basically started the discussion here at FiRe and is a virtual team member today. But we want to recognize and have him present here as we present our response. So with that.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about something that we are all familiar with. You're all industry leaders and technology leaders and started companies, etc. And there's a document or a set of documents that we all often work with called a balance sheet or an income statement. And if you look at a document like that, let's say from a public company or your own private company, there is a simple format, right? And the format says things went into the company and things came out, hopefully as profit, right? And there's one remarkable thing right at the top, which often in brackets, which says dollar millions, euros, etc. And from that formative ingredient, you're able to read the rest of the document, right? Now use that construct. Now, complex enterprises all reduced to a single variable that you can analyze and process. And let's say you are a CEO of such an entity, you'll be able to read that set of statements with even more depth and profundity, right? Now, imagine that you are the CEO of a company called your body, right? How would you prepare the balance sheet and income statement of your body? And what in particular is that variable that you'll work on? Can you take a minute to see what that balance sheet would look like? Right? And the funny thing is, it is not a single variable. The task that Mark set out for us as we delve into it is remarkably complex. The body needs 20 amino acids. It needs, obviously, energy. And you say, what do I take in? Do I analyze by protein? Do I analyze by carbohydrate? Do I analyze by zinc, magnesium? So the balance sheet and the income statement of your body is extraordinarily complex. And that is just, if you will, a present state. So if I ask you, would you be able to forecast the state of your body 3 months from now, as we do for our company, next quarterly forecast? Would you be able to do that? We are hardly able to predict 8 hours after a meal what our state would be, let alone 3 months later. So we are at a state in terms of our own systems, although we think we are in control of what we put in, that we have no sense for the black box and no sense for the outcomes. So this vector chart kind of tries to get at that. Look at the complexity of the vectors. We take in processed foods. Sure, there's some database, some labeling, and some studies. There's a vector of cooked foods, pasta, etc. Of course, there are primary ingredients. We take in fruits, vegetables, etc. And as you go through this vector set, then you've got a set of things associated with yourself, the black box. You've got blood tests, and you've got other details about yourself. Then this entire system inside is something which is completely unknown. We think, okay, let us take a little bit more iron in our bodies, but we really don't know how the black box inside our cells processes that ingredient. So we have digestive enzymes, flora inside. As Craig talked about, simple things can destroy a complete bacterial field inside our body and change the outcomes. So even though we might all take a standard set of good ingredients, what happens inside can be amazingly different. So we have to understand the internal state as well. And so we look at this, okay, what can we do? Can we understand the acids, the proteins? Can we put camera probes inside? And what would be the consequences? Well, we might have certain outcomes, headaches, fevers, diseases, or maybe good health conditions. And we also have to think about the social interactions and the context. And we all live in a very society which is increasingly connected, and therefore we can influence each other for good and for bad. So these are some of the vectors of analysis in terms of how you would create your own personal balance sheet or income statement for your body. And as you can see, it's non-trivial. There's almost no simple way to grab hold of one thing, like in a bracket, million, or dollar, or carbohydrates or proteins, and say from that vector or that variable, I'm going to analyze my state. So this is a highly nonlinear, multivariable, heavily correlated system that to an extent we have no clue about, and it's ourselves. So with that, let me give it to André.
Thank you, Sri. Yes, very complex, multifaceted topic here. So we had a great time in this team talking about all of this, including the technology. I'm going to step back, excuse me, a little bit to last year because I had the pleasure of spending time with Larry, and I realized that he's far ahead of most of us. He does SNPs analysis. I think if anybody goes to their doctor's going to stare at them and say, well, I don't really do this. So I thought I would, in the spirit of what we talked about last year, just step back and give everybody in the room a key to read what we're talking about today as the team, some of these vectors, but bring it into maybe a context that we can relate to. In the US, at least, there's a lot of discussion about something called metabolic syndrome. I don't know how many people in the room are familiar with this or have heard about it. Nobody. One person. Fantastic. Two people, and that makes three of us because my doctor told me I'm a candidate for this. But reading off the slide, it's a series of risk factors that altogether make a lot of risk for us. It's a health risk. It can lead to diabetes, heart attack, kidney disease, fatty liver disease, which is something that is not diagnosed very much in this country, peripheral artery disease, and obviously a stroke. There are about 30 or 40 million people in the US that are thought to be at risk. The reason it is germane to what we're talking about here as a key to read the micronutrition analysis is that most of it's related to food and exercise, the topics really that are central to what our group is working on. And everybody in the room can actually auto-diagnose themselves the way Larry did last year. There are two really simple metrics for this. Extra weight around the middle of your body. We fondly pat our bellies. For men, it's over 40 inches. For women, it's over 35 inches. And then there's insulin resistance, which is something that's maybe not so obvious to us, but it comes up in blood tests and in glucose tests with our regular physical. And then if you look back over the eons, I cannot interpret -4 to 10 to the 6th. I think that's a long time ago. You can see to the right where we live today that we have much more fat in our diet, we have complex fats, and we theoretically get calories from this fat. So nutrition is at the center of this entire dynamic, but it's also at the center of some of the more modern diseases. Not one thing, it's a group of things. So generally, it's thought that if you have 3 or more of these syndromes, you're a candidate for metabolic syndrome. So I would draw your attention to blood pressure. That's easy to measure. There's a lot of technology for that. But blood pressure is important if you measure it constantly, not just once a year when you go and have a physical. If you can keep track of that, and if you have a way to relay that to your healthcare provider, then it's of use in the context of everything else. Fasting blood sugar, if it's more than 100, that's not good. Large waist, as I just said, and cholesterol, the good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, the interplay of the two, and triglycerides. This all comes together to determine whether this is going to be a problem for you, especially later in life, after 40 or 50, coupled with a sedentary lifestyle. What is perhaps more important about these factors is they can all be tested for with the technology that exists today. And the key to reading it is integration. If you have a doctor that is looking at this in a holistic way, including food, which is not on the chart, then this is significant. If it's looked at disparately, like you only talk about your bad cholesterol or your good cholesterol, or I have high blood pressure in the absence of looking at the other factors, if you don't integrate that information, then perhaps it's less useful and you can't act on it. So I think that if Larry had been a regular person like us, like me, he would have gone to the doctor, and the doctor would have said, Larry, I think you're maybe a candidate for metabolic syndrome. And from there, from reading these 4 things, would have come back and said, you have inflammation, et cetera, and would have been diagnosed with Crohn's disease. So this is how the rest of us will catch up with Larry, by looking at these factors. So how do you prevent this? It's actually quite simple. A low diet fat, a low fat diet, which we talk about. Fish, which is not simple. We have to eat oily fish, and of course we've heard during the last 2 days that fish is a problem because they carry toxins, but we should eat fish. Regular exercise, it doesn't mean having to ride 100 miles on a bike through a canyon. About 30 minutes a day of walking a dog or something fairly regular would do it. Losing weight, and particular, when you say losing weight, what does that mean? Well, everybody should lose between 7 and 10% of their current weight. That's the goal. It's not that I need to lose less or more than somebody else, just 7 or 10%. Lowering the cholesterol is, of course, tied to exercise, and it does lower naturally. If you can't do it, then there are drugs for that, but I generally recommend that's only in an extreme situation. I'm not a doctor, by the way. And the last part is smoking. Nobody should smoke. And one of the one of the things I kept coming back to as part of this work group, we were trying to figure out whether high fructose corn syrup or, natural cane sugar would be better in Coca-Cola. How do we measure that? We had technology discussions. So you really come to the realization that actually none of that's acceptable. The starting point is no fast food, no soft drinks, and you have to go back to a much simpler, we all have to go back to a much simpler diet. So that was to give you a key to read the context of what we're talking about today. As we go through the rest of the slides, you can all auto-diagnose yourselves, and I suggest that you also ask your primary care physician what they think about metabolic syndrome, and it's a context to read the rest of our slides.
So as we had this discussion, it was very interesting to compare what the real world brings to us. And with Andre's comments that he brought forward, this metabolic syndrome all of a sudden became a very near and real thing to probably many of us, to say, well, I may not qualify for all 3 or for 3 of them, but I certainly am close to this boundary. What can I do? And so this is where we're living today. And when we look at the challenges that we've had in the past, the challenges have been fires and have been water and things, and all very important, all very essential. But this is me. I mean, it doesn't get any closer to this, as we realized last year with Larry's talk as well, is this is very personal. This is where we are living. And this is a journey. And the challenge is, how do we take this journey so that we can make it, and not only ourselves, because we tend to be a very motivated group, the FiRe community. We see things, we see technology, we identify trends, and we move. We take action. That's who we are. But we also want to bring the rest of the world with us, because this is our community as well. So what we want to do is we kind of take a look at how do we move people from where they're at today to where we all want to be. And so it's kind of a crawl, walk, run process of moving through this so that people aren't going to go from Krispy Kreme donuts today to straight broccoli tomorrow, right? This is something that their systems want to adapt to, that they in order for it to stick, it really needs to become part of the lifestyle. And so we understand that there's a journey here. So let's talk through the journey, right? The first journey would be understanding the learning process, learning about nutrition, learning about these things, and a very high granularity. So this is about food identification, basic nutrition guide to foods. So how to read the nutrition labels on your food materials that you see in the grocery store. Saturated fats versus trans fats versus unsaturated fats. Basic things. Proteins versus sugars. So that people are kind of getting in the hand of not looking at the advertising on it and all the marketing materials, but they turn it around and start looking at the facts, because that's how we're going to move forward. So the motivation here is the personal goals and nutrition requirements. Perhaps there are some medical conditions or doctor's advice that's the motivation to take this forward. It may also be the social effect or family that say, listen, everybody wants to get healthier in this family. It could be the spouse that's all of a sudden decided to take this on, and then the other members of the family follow. So what do we see in the learning cycle? The modification of behavior, shifting away from red meats, discussing how to be more nutritious, make the right choices during mealtime. Other things that we can do to modify behavior as part of the learning cycle is using the social networks. Because as we know, think of how you exercise, right? If there's another person that you're scheduled to meet at the club or going to go meet at a trailhead or meet at some point to go ride, there's a much higher likelihood that you're going to be there and show up for them. Social networks are very similar in the fact that with the groupthink and with this kind of combinations that we were discussing, and in fact, David was bringing this up, is taking a photo of the food plate and then sharing that out on the internet with your group. And your group are very like-minded, very similar people to yourself, so it won't be the judgment that you might see if it's out in the public, but it's also with other people to get feedback on that. It's like, wow, you're eating really healthy, or, hey, I saw the ice cream on that plate. But get that type of feedback. So we're just starting to get and people identify with being healthy and being nutrition and thinking this way. So this is the first part of the shift. And the results, just taking that picture from the cell phone or what have you, the act of taking that picture is a mental and reminder of, I'm being nutritious, I'm committed to doing this. When you take a specific action, it reminds you of this constant reminder. So you see weight management, blood sugar is better managed, weight management is all part of that. The technology, smartphone applications, right? To increase the basic knowledge, what are the basic nutrition databases? What are the combinations of foods that I eat? If I eat a lot of leafy greens, you have better assimilation of that nutrition by eating some fats with it. So there's things that you can learn along the way as you take pictures of the food. It can say, wow, I noticed that you're eating this. Would you like to have some fats with that? Olives or something like that would be good because that will increase your intake of the good things. So this is just, again, the beginning, right? So we reward the behavior with a tracking system, perhaps for adults, that says, wow, here's the curves and here's your trend lines, just as we saw before, of the exercise and the making the smart choices, you'll see things trend down in the correct direction that we're looking for. For younger adults and for kids, a game or a tracking system for them that makes it fun, right? This is a gaming community, Xbox and other type of environments, smartphone games, all the Zynga, Facebook games, that people can participate in as part of becoming healthy, and they get rewards. So if they make the right choices, they get additional playing time, or they get credits, or they get to buy, they get virtual money in the games to do things. So we create a motivation and we create a feedback loop. So we'll kind of move through this phase. But some of the new technology you may see along the way, for example, Sri came up with the idea of having a fork, for example, that had sensors on the tines of the fork that would sense fatty acids, sucroses, amino acids, and proteins, that if you stir it or you put it in the food, it actually will report out, and then via wireless connection, report that to your smartphone or other device to upload this and provide that data into the cloud. That we have other situations such as an eat well plate, or this became our discussion around nanosensors built into the plate of food. So the plate itself is full of nanosensors that can do the spectral analysis of the food that's on your plate, so that when you place the food on the plate, you actually get a report out of what it senses on the plate, and make it easy to do that. Because what happens when you get sauces and things like that? What really are the component ingredients, right? So the nanoplate. Also, the discussion was, well, what happens if you go to a restaurant? It's like, bring your own plate. Socially, that's probably not going to fly. But what if you had a little can of spray, for example, that you could spray on the food where it would actually bioluminesce, or when you see fats or other materials where you can easily identify the healthy foods from the not so healthy and make the right choices about what you want to eat on a plate of food. Just things that will help people make the right choices so you can learn as you do this. So continuing the journey, phase 2, as we step into this, now we're extending this. Now we have started on this healthy path. Now we are asking the right questions. So we look at nutrition in detail, carbs, fats, proteins. Now we start looking at the toxins and contaminants, because as we start shifting our food choices, we also want to monitor what type of that real effect is going to have on us. So yes, oily fish, but do you really want to have tuna as your main course of food because of mercury contamination and things of that order? So we look and balance that. We start tracking the inputs, and as we'll talk, we start tracking the outputs. So we understand, just as Sri was talking about the balance sheet for the company, that we start managing our own balance sheet of what we're taking in and what the outputs are as well, and add exercise now to the equation. So the extending model is really modified by the fact that you're adding exercise in, because now you're taking this committed action that really says, I'm on this path. So the motivation starts to become self-fulfilling because you see the challenges and the changes in your life. Your behaviors change because you continue your shift to the right foods, and your overall health and your level of fitness starts increasing. How do we use this with technology? So remember the QR labels that you see on different devices or sales items and what have you, is to put QR labels on foods in the produce departments and et cetera, so that you can just take a picture of that or tag it and be able to quickly get the nutritional analysis related to that food product. So it's not just the nutrition on the label, which are the 5 or 7 things, but now you start getting the more detailed information of the amino acids and the proteins and detailed breakdowns of what the components are, so that nutritional information is not only available to you to read, but into your cloud programs, it actually starts mapping in these proteins and amino acids and fatty acids into the right categories of what you're eating. So you can go to a store and determine what you want to eat for a balanced diet. So what is my meal plan really going to meet my requirements? The organic labeled foods must also include the micronutrient information based on the soils and the fertilizers of the feedstocks, the history of the food and the source in the soils, so that we can have the information versus a wild, caught salmon versus a farm-raised salmon, right? The omega-3 is going to be very, very different profile than you'd see from a farm-raised stock, as we discussed earlier, the corns and things of that order. Similar with beef and anything else, you'll be able to tell grass-fed beef from corn-fed beef. And all of a sudden, that nutritional information starts surfacing and now becomes information that we are making conscious decisions as consumers about what we're going to eat. The shift to nutritional eating and shifting the industry is going to be by the consumers demanding it and getting this information and surfacing it and having those discussions. So we have smartphone-based probes to sample foods. Now we have to sterilize themselves and things of that order, but you can actually probe foods as well to understand what they are. You have biochips, non-invasive chips. We're at the extending level, right? This is phase 2, right? So biochips, these are non-invasive chips to measure heart rate, oxygenation, sweat, exercise levels. And as we get more and more detailed information on that, the sweat and these type of secretions from our body will be able to map to the foods that we're eating and be able to get more and more intelligent about that. But again, we're going at phase 2. We continue to reward the behavior, and we extend the knowledge, because now we're talking about the micronutrients, the amino acids, and ancient grains. Instead of just talking about grains, we're talking about ancient grains that actually have all the amino acids that you need to have to form a complete protein to build the right tissues in your body. So people are now making the connection between amino acids to proteins to tissue to healthy person. And that creates a new pathway of thinking about how we eat, how nutrition means to us, because we can map the foods literally to our skin and our tissues. So there's an image of the biochips and sensors that can be done. Some of these sensors are actually made of paper or even coated paper to be able to provide the sensor capabilities. Very, very small, but also one key element here is the Biopill. And this is a wireless device that you swallow that travels through your system and then does the analysis through the biochip layers with the interfaces for the different fluids it experiences as it travels through your body. So it will be able to track what's in your esophagus, what's in the stomach, what type of flora it finds in the intestinal tract, to do a complete inventory of what's there. And For example, doing this prior to really eating a meal, you can get a baseline. Eating it after a meal, you can start seeing how the flora is interacting and be able to take and track this information, uploading it into the cloud, building these databases of norms and then variations from the norm, so we can start identifying our own personal variations from the, quote, standard requirements, so that we are personally tailoring our diet to who we are and what our needs are. So now we step into the leading part of the discussion. Now we're going into the detailed breakdown of understanding ourselves, tracking the multiple inputs and outputs. This is really where we started seeing Larry make a lot of his discoveries, right? The detailed understanding of the micronutrients, biochemical interactions, your flora, your personal flora and fauna, and what foods are good for you, and as André mentioned, which foods might cause inflammation, right? This very, very low-grade inflammation that's just sitting there lurking, and that may develop into a Crohn's disease or other type of things that we had no awareness of. But by doing this close inspection, we get early warning system using these technologies and understanding. So not only do our foods and our nutrition map, but we get an internal view of what our system really is that really isn't done today. Now we get to the quantified self level of inputs and outputs. So our modifying our behavior, now we really focus on the leafy greens, the fruits, the veggies, the nuts with rich micronutrient sources, right? We're limiting animal proteins, they're naturally raised, and they're very, very limited because we know what our body needs and how it functions. So the results of the leading phase is that we get our personal micronutrient requirements that are personalized for our body, the things that we eat, basically some of the plants and things that are in our locale that we can eat. And including sites as, and we'll reference this later, but as we know our own personal micronutrient profile, we can go online and use the cloud, and sites such as Shopwell, for example, will actually direct you to specific foods that meet your nutritional requirements. And if you're lacking amino acids or minerals or specific components, then it'll identify the foods that help meet that need. So we're not taking supplements, we're taking foods. And these foods are what make us healthy. It's not the pills and the things of that order. Well, the Biopill perhaps might certainly assist us. But the Biopill in this case steps up to being able to do video photography of the GI tract as well. So not only can it do the sampling, but also do actual photography of the gut and things that are going on and transpiring in the gut itself.
If I might, there's one argument we didn't settle, and that is whether this should be wireless or wired, because I think you can carry a lot more bandwidth if this is wired and it goes all the way through and it helps to recover it. But no one agreed with me.
Yeah, we certainly hope it'd be fiber optic and not electrical, that's for sure. You can see that the hours of the challenge kind of wear on us after time. Yeah, a little punch drunk sometimes occurs in this event.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So now we move the QR labels to a certified organic labels. And this is where we really raise the bar to what we really want to see happen, right? The detailed nutritional information, the sources, where raised and where it's grown, the nutrient breakdown, the contaminations and toxins, the details of where this is. And this allows the industries to actually recognize the value of the food they're producing. Why does it cost more to buy organic? Well, when you look at the total cost and the value that the food is providing based on its micronutrients, it becomes very obvious that this is clearly more valuable. And people can make those choices because now they're informed and they're confident in what they know as opposed to all the marketing information that's pumped out into the ether. So this is a real step forward, is making very specific changes that using QR codes. And again, what's the threat? Well, the QR codes aren't going to be read by normal people walking down the aisle, so it may not be that hard to adopt. It'll be the people that are making the choices with the QR codes to use that information. So, industry taking this on might be less resistance because it's only for a certain subset of people that want it, and that number will grow. Biopills will know, as we talked about, rewarding behavior. We continue down the path of rewarding behavior and implementing the self-analysis because now we have this detailed background. There was a lot of discussion about technologies that we can use to address solutions and to be able to bring technologies to bear on this solution. Some of them focused on the individual capabilities, such as the photo food diary. So you take pictures of the foods that you eat, and it recognizes the foods. And people tend to eat in a pattern. So once you really kind of identify the foods that you eat, all of a sudden this tool becomes more and more accurate because your portion sizes are the same. You tweak it a little bit so that taking the photo, which would in initial saying that's not very precise, based upon the patterns of people that we are, it does become more precise because we tweak it to the portion size that we use and the foods and how much quantity there is. So it might seem to be too granular, but over time it becomes more accurate. Toxin detectors, sprays, to be able to identify what are the things that are unhealthy for us that we can't see. Maybe we don't have that capability of the probes, but if we can detect some common contaminants. And enhanced microwave capabilities. Look at common devices that we use today, and what are the things that we can use just passively by everyday usage. As you use the microwave, there's off gases and odors and steam, as many of us know, that can be sensed and then analyzed for what are the contents that are in those foods. And so there's just simple things that could just slight modifications detect what's in foods that we're cooking. And also, as you continue to cook the food, the nutritional value tails off. So how much do you really want to cook that food, right?
And incorporate a scale in the turntables, so now you've got the weight. And the microwave could be pulsed in certain ways that would possibly get resonance reactions. So you're getting the outgassing, you're getting some resonance reactions, you're getting changes in the weight, and you're getting calculation of the effect upon the lipids that are detected with time of heat of cooking.
Yeah.
So this would be a somewhat just fairly easily modifiable device that would then give us micronutrient analysis.
David, if I can add to that, one can conceive that the front face of the microwave itself has got a display which measures what went inside. It's got the detection capability and comes back with, this food is good for you when taken in the following proportion or whatever, right? So you kind of display view of the world as well.
There might even be a diagnostic mode that doesn't heat it very much,
Right.
Yeah.
in which case you just put in
And
whatever
you think about the front face of the microwave, which is flat, right? Perfect for a screen to provide information right there, right? So it's almost a natural come together of technology. A nice integration, as you might say. So we talked about the biofork and the food analysis plate. Socially, we look at the local food photo clubs and these groups and the social grouping that we can do. Community-based nutrition reviews. You've seen Yelp and good quality restaurants. But you can also, restaurants that are developing today are really focused on nutrition. They are coming up. And to be able to have feedback and reviews on very healthy-oriented restaurants that are working as part of the supply chain as well of community-sourced food, CSAs, locally sourced agriculture, so that we are really getting the nutritional value, because the distance between the farm to the market is a matter of minutes or miles as opposed to hundreds of miles or tens of miles. And then to balance out the ecosystem. And then when you take a look at what are the big things that we would do, right? And this is saying, it's the reason it's called a 720 view, because it's 360 view by 2, right? A 360 view of the foods that we're taking in, and a 360 view of the residuals that are left behind. And in doing that, that really identifies this baseline, right? It gives us really specific data about quantifying who we are. But so let's kind of understand how we're doing this, right? So it's a series of data samples that you would take, perhaps every 3 months or something of that order, but you would specifically take a day, for example, to monitor what's going on. And so you might actually swallow 4 of these biopills, right? One in the morning was a baseline, and then one after each meal to see how the food, and then recording all your food very specifically, to see how that food combination interacts with your systems, so you can identify the specific interactions in the gut that are going on to detect the variations from the predicted set of what would normally occur by the cloud data, saying this is what would normally occur. And what we're doing into that is by getting these samples and developing these labs on a chip, right? So what's the technology? The labs on a chip would do the blood sampling, for example. A labs on a chip to do stool samples. We'd have to figure out how to handle that appropriately. But we can make that happen. Do the food analysis, right? The glucose versus the fructose, the amino acids and the proteins, and all the breakdown of all the subcomponents, all the amino acids that are required, the essentials, and then what are the ones that are generally good for you, and then the non-essential ones. How are we doing in mapping out our health and our nutritional pattern, right? So you actually end up with a map that says, here's where you're at, here's what your food habits are, and here are the things that are missing. So you end up with a scorecard, basically, of what to do. Combine that with a DNA analysis, like 23andMe and that type of thing that we saw last year, that we end up with this really robust profile of who we are and what our body is and what it needs are, that's personally tailored to you. Combine that with the exercise data and your profile information, upload that to the cloud, and now we start aggregating data of nutritious, healthy people and the changes that they're making. And now we move to the next phase, because now we move in the model to a predictive model, right? And André was talking about that. This is one of the discussions that we've had, is moving to this predictive model, right? Because right now we're doing the here's what you ate. Now, instead, if you had this instead, or if you want to set up a scenario, I want to be able to accomplish the following goals, right? I'm going to go ride a century. I'm going to go run a marathon. I want to lose an additional weight, or BMI. I really want to lose inches, not pounds. So setting up specific scenarios for goals, and then having the nutrition profile actually tell you, here's how you get there most efficiently, most effectively, and healthy. It's not all carbs or not all fats or these kind of radical diets that are off balance. But this is nutritionally very specific evidence of, here's what you need to eat. And then go out to Shopwell or something like that and say, there you go. Here's the foods that you need to buy in your shopping list. And in fact, you look at Amazon Fresh or any of these type of things, this can be done very handily. We talk about integration, right? So you integrate what you're eating, the feedback of what its impact is on your body, and then it turns around and tells you what the variations are to make you more healthy, and here's how you buy them, and here are the selections that we recommend. Wow, now we talk about integration, and we're fundamentally changing the food cycle, right? We're fundamentally changing and consumers are driving it based on real information, right? This is the change. This is the change, right? So we dial in our performance, we abstract our profiles, so personally identified information is gone, but we aggregate that data so that we are getting more and more precise about what the human cycle is, and we get into really detailed information based upon gender, based upon ethnic backgrounds, based upon heritage, based upon certain medical conditions that are known, DNA mappings, male or female, certain cycles that go on, pregnancy. Wow. Think of how we can actually quantify ourselves and make fundamental changes. I mean, this is really exciting. I mean, all of a sudden you start looking at, and as entrepreneurs in the room, you start realizing, hey, there's real opportunities here. We talked about white space things. Where are the gaps that we can fill in? It gets very, very exciting.
And also, you can even appeal to the old appetites by saying, if you're having this analysis, one of the things you can report is, you've been very virtuous this week. You've earned a burger.
Yeah, that's right. But then the fat from the burger.
Penalty.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. But the point is, what you're saying is, you've been so virtuous, you can afford to sin a little.
Yes.
And that makes the sin so tasty.
Yeah, you've earned it. And in the technology sense, this is not, a lot of this, we are not going far off course here. Part of this discussion with Jerry, and Jerry will make comments later, is that this isn't Star Trek. This is real stuff that's available today that we can bring the ecosystem together, and Eric will talk about the platform here shortly, but we have these sensors. We just need to create the cases to integrate these into meaningful probes and sensors and form factors that can be used by everyday people that are socially acceptable to be able to do this and do it elegantly, right? We have that talent and ability to sort that out. Okay, is there a question before we move on?
I have a very simple question. So I really enjoyed the balance sheet conversation at the start of this. The reality is we're already collecting what the entire United States of America eats. And we do that because everybody scans their little Price Chopper or Stop and Shop or whatever grocery store card in order to get 20 cents off gas in the parking lot or whatever. And it seems to me that one of the interesting questions as a starting point is the macro big data analysis of what it is that everybody's consuming merged against the existing growing healthcare database is cool.
Good input.
And what we've not tested at all is, so can I give you $5 off on your coupon bill if you don't buy soda?
Yeah.
We
Good
haven't
input.
played with some really simple mechanisms. We're getting them to buy Cheez-Its because they're free, but we're not getting them to not buy Cheez-Its or to,
Yep.
Bananas are free if you don't buy soda.
Yep. So that segue.
May I just say something? Excellent point, Stephen. But we want to save questions until we're
Understand.
done.
I understand,
Yeah.
but I didn't know if we were some key point. So what it does segue us to, though, is this business opportunity. So Sri and then Eric, right?
Take a minute to talk about this. This is already an industry in play. This industry has been in play largely because of the artifacts of laboratory testing, et cetera, versus the personalized view that we are currently providing. And so to Ty's point, the technology underlying many of the things that we are talking about already exists. It just has to be reapplied to to the environment we are discussing. Other important thing is I talked about us or each one of us as a company. So think of it. We are 6 billion me inks. If these 6 billion me inks, the single most important thing to us is the survival of this company, right? And my dad was sick, and I said, hey, I should get you a blood pressure monitor. That's $125 or something like that. Each one of us does indeed spend increasingly on ourselves versus going to a doctor and saying, test me once in 3 months. So the potential industry for 6 billion me incorporated is huge. And so the industry which develops around this is humongous. So the profit motive is very powerful. We need to encourage it by saying we are consumers, and we would like these personalized devices that enhance the livelihoods and survival of this personal company that we run called ourselves. And that's the focus of this ecosystem.
So logically, Eric, very, very well suited to this.
Okay, so we were able to wrap our heads around the idea that the science was either near term or already here and more or less ready to go. But then it became obvious also that the ecosystem is daunting, extremely complex, a zillion participants, all kinds of variables. And I think we had almost an epiphany moment yesterday evening when it occurred to us that what would have to happen here is someone would have to step forward and offer the complete vision and create the initial platform to launch on. And I was reminded of the case study work that John Hagel did a few years ago around Sealand. In fact, one of the members of our working group last night, his father worked for Sealand and could kind of talk about that and make it come real for the group. But you had to have somebody with a vision, and then someone that was willing to go ahead and develop the IP and the patents and then make it shareable for the world, and then agree to compete in that market space. Maybe Sealand's a bit esoteric for a science fair project like this. So we started thinking about, well, what else makes sense? And I think you could make a strong argument that something like the Apple Apps Store is a platform and a place to start. And what's pretty clear, we think, is in the short run, or stage one, there'll have to be an application market that's somewhat cohesive, that is true to some kind of a vision of where we're going with all this data. Because we heard now about we can collect this data, we can collect that data over there. We could match the data we already have in the healthcare system with where people buy Cheetos. Well, who's going to do that? So there has to be a platform in place to aggregate this and a reward system for the early entrants. So we believe that that's probably can be done and accomplished in the early phases, either perhaps in the wellness industry, maybe it's LA Fitness, or maybe it's Gold's Gym, or maybe it's a consortium of those that agree to create an initial platform. Clearly the targeted audience in the very near term is the Quantified Self movement, and those that have acute needs immediately, who for all intents and purposes are part of the Quantified Self, even if they don't officially declare membership. And then, and also an assumption that there's probably a willingness of that group, because of the acute nature and need they might have, to pay some kind of a fee for service, nominal. Perhaps it can be partially funded or offset by an ad-based model, but that also probably boutique analytics firms, and I think we can apply the term firm here rather liberally to include things like research institutes and universities, who would have probably a particular interest in understanding what kinds of dietary habits are impacting what kinds of diseases that are being mapped inside of the database, because you have people that have Crohn's disease, and you can go look at all of those folks and run up the data and take a look at what they're doing, what they're eating, where they're eating it, where they got it. And then we believe that in stage two, we can start to do the connection of the people, and starting to use wireless and social media and transaction fees going to the platform owner for more advanced market participants. So Ty alluded to perhaps Yelp gets in the game, OnTable gets in the game for reservations. We start having geo-based services that are already in our phones. So if you're in Laguna Beach and you're going to take 4 friends out to dinner tonight, we look inside the cloud app, we kind of know what you've been up to, what you've been eating, and it comes back and says, you know, based on where you're at right now, you probably ought to go to Sapphire tonight for dinner. You'll do better there than you will at that expensive French restaurant with all of the interesting sauces. And then finally, we think in stage 3 that once the vision is created and the momentum occurs, then we think the big players will probably want to enter. Just as we saw in the Apple apps market, You didn't see Target jump in on the iPhone 2.5, 3 years ago, but you see it huge today because once the platform was there, the bigger entrants will want to come in. In all likelihood, when the big entrants come in, and I think big entrants in this case means the big payers, probably the big providers, and also the big self-insureds like the Microsofts and the Deloittes of the world, they'll be incentivized to want to see that platform expand because there's real savings in terms of healthcare benefits directly back to the people that pay the most for this stuff. So the ecosystem itself, as we mentioned, is daunting, but there does have to emerge an orchestrator. And we can have an argument of interest, I think, at a later point on, is it a completely orchestrated ecosystem? Is it a facilitated ecosystem? But nevertheless, we've got to figure out who the participants are and have a very clear understanding of how they win in this process. Just the way I think Bill Gates had a very clear understanding of who was going to win in the Microsoft ecosystem over time, and that's why so many developers wanted to come into that platform and so many consumers wanted to participate in the benefits. So I won't dwell on that. The stakeholders, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I think we think perhaps in the short run it's the health clubs, the smaller boutique providers that would have an incentivized interest. We think there'll be a lot of interest in the data that can be collected again early on with the boutiques. In that case, I think it's research firms and individuals that believe they can aggregate that data and resell it. As an aside, at least one of you by now said, well, what about that HIPAA stuff? None of us are lawyers up here, but just keep in mind this is an opt-in system. So it's not a push out, it's an opt-in, and therefore by definition, if you opt in, accept the terms and conditions, you're accepting the fact that your data would be shared amongst many in a variety of ways. Talk a little bit about the individuals. I think that's rather obvious based on the technology. Employers and large corporations, they stand besides individuals and all the 6 billion incorporated. The big corporations that are the biggest payers probably have the most to win here. Obviously, it needs active government participation, so we can't overlook that. The supply chain is daunting and complex on any level you want to look at it, so that has to be dealt with. And I mentioned the QR coding and the like, again, daunting, but we think a pull model where the market votes with its feet to the healthiest foods based on this scoring system probably wins at the end of the day. And I won't go in here because we've got to get on, but just one final thought. It should have at least crossed one or two minds by now that, hey, we've kind of seen this not work so well in the healthcare market around healthcare records. And we think the difference here is that a couple-fold. One is getting your healthcare record built was a daunting task because it was a lot of manual input. You got to collect it from a lot of places. And then most places you would take that aggregated data to didn't want to believe it because they didn't participate personally in building the healthcare record. So you couldn't convince a doctor or a surgeon to take it. And then finally, beyond yourself, there wasn't a lot of benefit to anybody else. So we think by doing this with automation, with smartphone tools, with probes, we take the onus off the data input. And because we think there's a wide variety in the ecosystem of participants that want to exercise that data, this probably wins. We talked about this a little bit, so I'll let it go.
Okay.
Well,
And then Jerry.
Yeah, Jerry.
I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with this, but I'll use it anyway. So, when I got Mark's email about the challenge this year, I looked at it, and as I normally do, I hit the reply button, and I was going to say, probably not. But turns out that I'm on the review panel for the Beckman Institute. And I show up there every 18 months, and they've moved from semiconductors, which is sort of a dead subject in a research lab, to more psychological issues. And Art Kramer runs the center now. He got up and gave this unit on successful aging. And I said to myself, successful aging is death, right? He says, yes, it is. He says, but it's how you die it's important. So he says, successful aging is living a very healthy life, playing tennis one afternoon, going to bed, and not waking up. I said, count me in, because every one of my relatives who died had lingered. I hate this word lingering. And so once I thought about in terms of that, I said to myself, now I'm going to join this group, even though I don't know anything about it. I'm not a systems guy. But it dawned on me what the real problem was, is that we are all systems. Unfortunately, we're not just male models or female models. You're an individual system. You have hearts, unless you're a lawyer. You've got all these organs in there that are working what they're doing, but they're different. Each one is different. I mean, we have a transplant bank, right? And so to summarize this thing, these two senses, your tongue and your nose, worked very well for 500,000 years, and all of a sudden, we became prosperous. And the word gourmet came out, fast foods. And suddenly people were making money on stuff that your nose and your mouth couldn't tell was bad for you, right? So that's why we met and came up with this conceptual system, and in some cases there are details there. But my job is to sort of, let's just sit down and imagine, say sometime in the future, and we're still alive hopefully, I sit down in front and I'm getting ready to take some, at a table or someplace, I'm going to take some food and put it in my mouth. What's going to happen, or should happen, is that somewhere on a sensor of your body is your current physiological state, okay? And suppose for that 5 minutes or seconds in front of you, you have an allergy to something, so you're getting ready to eat a clam. So you get ready to put this thing in a clam, and all of a sudden the bell rings, or the light goes blink, blink. You don't want to eat that. The trouble, and the reason this is what it's going to look like is because you can't go to your doctor every 6 months, have a good physical, and say, "You're doing okay, take off some weight." You have a metabolic crisis facing you, He'll tell you that over and over again, but he wants to get paid and have you come back so you don't take the weight off, and so you're obese like me. But I feel good, you see, and I can't tell, because if I feel good, what's going to happen. And so we're going to need this device that tells you the details of what Mark assigned us, namely an analytical chemistry, microanalysis ability of what it is that's going to go into your mouth, matched to the system details of who you are. And that's really the bottom line of what we've done here today, in my opinion, okay? And I look forward to that time, because I don't want to linger. I don't want to commit suicide either, because I like living, but I don't want to linger.
Well, Jerry, we know how you want to go. It's following Paul Anderson's advice at age 140 at the hands of an irate husband.
Yeah. Well put.
No, we're good.
Okay, we're good. Should we make some quick spot comments? I personally believe that the very first things will be researchers will want access to test subjects. And I think there will be a synergy between small early adopter communities like Larry Smarr and the research community, where you can dive right into these sorts of things. And I think that'll be early, before what Eric was talking about. I think a second early adoption will be these things that will enable you to determine contaminants. I think that people will adopt those very, very early. And I think that they will drive this in unexpected ways. Yeah. And so that I think is an easier problem to address than micronutrition. And people are a little more paranoid, so I think that'll come first. I think one thing that was left out was the putting of, I love the Biopill, but I think that the idea that our toilets will have sensors in them is both creepy and fairly obvious. And I'll pass it and let somebody else chime in.
Well, I think we need to hand the scoring table back to our esteemed leader for judgment against his objective that he set us out to do, and for his comments. So.
Okay. I have two questions before we do that, and only two, which is quite a compliment given this hour-long presentation. One is, what do you think is going to cause companies to create this more detailed list of ingredients and put it into the QR label?
It's going to be market-driven. Come on, look. If I'm getting ready to eat a piece of, I won't name the product, and the bell goes off, the companies will know about it sooner or later, because everybody else's little device is going to tell them. And we're not talking about a elite group of people owning these things. When I heard your challenge, I said, we're going to make this worldwide. There are going to be people even wireless. I mean, with sets in Africa, who can decide whether the berries are no good or not? You know, I mean, come on.
Even the French will do this.
I'm sorry?
Even the French would do this.
Might be
Right,
lagging.
even the
They
French.
might be lagging in that regard.
Yeah, I think, excuse me, I think it will be the market, the consumers. There's a piece in the New York Times, if anybody caught it today. The companies are resisting labeling of GMO foods in this country, but I think there's going to be increasing awareness. I think the companies are going to have to satisfy that demand.
And I think with gluten-free and all these other requirements that you see that are the Whole Foods type things coming up, you will see companies like Whole Foods and others taking that initiative. And I think you'll even see things like Walmart. I mean, as an image thing to kind of shift some of their image, they will start requiring, and they have enough market pull to actually say, we are going to take forward, and if you want to sell in this company, you have within the next 12 months to modify your packaging, to put a QR label on it. And the risk of the QR label, again, is low because only certain things can read it.
I think Walmart is absolutely key because it has great cultural resonance in the parts of America that are most resistant to this notion. There are large parts along the coast that will embrace this in a market reward way. But as long as we have culture war, you're going to have people who are going to say, you are nannying me. You are nagging me. Don't tell me what to eat. And this meme of don't nanny me, I think is the biggest obstacle to this. And if you get people who understand that culture, where a lot of the obesity is, and Walmart is the partner that understands that culture and is starting to swim upstream. I got to give them credit.
Yeah.
So
Well,
Walmart
they're
in
also-
Louisiana specifically would be a good place to begin, probably.
Yeah, I'd like to actually mention one of Ty's ideas along the way. I think the payers are very important in this dialogue. Your idea of having a rebate for your healthcare cost if you maintain certain targets, that would be a motivator. I certainly would. If I knew that I maintained a BMI of 20 and a certain weight for the entire year, and I got a couple $1,000s back from Aetna, I'd be happy. That would be an incentive. I think that's a very...
Yeah, you're going to tell my wife, it's like, listen, I got to ride this weekend so we can get that $5,000 back at the end of the year. Yeah. Hey.
Go to Hawaii.
Yeah.
All right, that was a good answer, I think. The other question is, and this is a very technical question. I love the inventions in general, but there was one that I was curious about how it worked. How does the spray thing that detects toxins work?
Yeah, so that came from me. If you think of luminol, to look for blood at a crime scene, there's a lot that can be done with neutral agents. And this is more of a response of looking for a toxin. I mean, we take in a lot of iron, if you're in New York, as we know, and other things that may be present. So there are ways to create sprays or have microparticles that are coated with antigens, put them on the food, and have a reader, which could be a smartphone or anything else, just like smartphones are used as microscopes today, thanks to Microsoft. So that's where that came from. A quick, easy way to do it in a place where you have uncontrolled.
And then do you then eat it?
You do make your own decision after that.
Is it edible?
Oh yeah, it would be neutral.
edible.
Yeah, it's totally neutral. Yeah.
So you detect all the poisons, and then you just shovel it down.
What if you do rat
Exactly.
DNA or stuff like
Rat
that?
DNA would be.
Or you can just go to
Another-
McDonald's.
All right. And then I had just some general comments. At first I was concerned because there was so much emphasis on personal behavior modification, which is important, but not exactly what this is about. And you solved that problem for me, so that went away. I love the idea of labels with details. I think that's critically important to all this, and I think that Jerry's right. I think it's going to be market-driven. I love the idea of mapping the food to the tissues. That's it. Biopill, very cool. So I was a little bit worried, like, if you had some kind of funny colon situation, and I remember the pictures from, from our new movie coming up of the birds full of plastic, and I was like hoping that I wouldn't be the bird full of plastic. So I almost understand the wire, David's bizarre idea of the wire, because you want it back.
There were
If you
4
eat
that
it
went
and
in and only 3 that came out.
that would be really, really unfortunate. So I guess my only worry about the biopill is making sure that it really comes out the other end.
But it exists, right? The pill cam exists.
it does
right?
exist.
So
Yeah.
they have proven it.
I recognize
Buy
that.
on the way
The
out.
TSA would tell you had it in you, too, as they scanned you.
Yeah, maybe they can help you get it out. The plate seemed pretty cool, you know. I think that's doable. The fork was very imaginative. I like that a lot. The cloud database is absolutely required. That makes a lot of sense. I agree with you completely about the scaling ability and the cost contribution there. The smartphone part of this is indispensable, I think.
Yeah.
The enhanced microwave, I love that. And the whole not cooking too hot. I can just see actually if you drive the cost down for the assay to chip level cost, where you just push the white button instead of the green button, and 20 seconds later you've got a complete assay of that food. That would be incredible. And I think it's achievable. No one thought of it yet.
Yeah.
So the tech stuff is great, I think. Matching your needs to foods online makes a lot of sense, and the more consumerized this is, the better, of course. An awful lot of this is exactly as you're describing it, Ty. It's an integration problem. I think you guys are right. I think that the tech in general is all done or close to being all done. And the money to be made, the work to be done here is highly integrative. And you're describing, I believe you're describing the very first parts of the compelling vision that we'll need to offer people as consumers. You know, I think you guys are all smart tech guys and you get the deep part of this. But the story you'd want to tell in a one-page ad in the New York Times or whatever is going to be, we're just hitting the front edge of that. There's a lot of that still to be explored. But I think you can kind of picture it.
There's a sense of critical mass, right? There's a sense, I think, as Eric and others, this orchestrator, but also you have a sense that there's enough critical mass to actually bring this together and have a heartbeat and bring this thing to fruition. And it's not a distant star.
Right. I like the whole kind of certified organic thing because there's so much argument over organic. That is a soft target, I think, because people who care about food know that it's often a fraud or a fake. And if you could take that approach, Whole Foods is an obvious example, they're really responsive. And if they knew that this wasn't truly organic or that it didn't have all the right ingredients in it, they'd respond to that.
That Andy label that they have right now for the right grains in the nutritional food, I think this is the next generation of Andy.
Yeah.
I think it would be a very easy step for them to advance that.
Right. I'm sorry, David, but I think the toilet thing is like a must-have. The Japanese are already all over this, so you can start in Tokyo and work your way back out, I think. I wanted to bring the idea that Paul Jacobs ended up with during our interview. The idea that the smartphone is actually a situational awareness device fits perfectly into this conversation. And I think you've essentially described it already. And if you could imagine, so I want to take the Google glasses for a minute, because, and then we'll back it down to something a little more doable. But that's close technology. And imagine yourself walking down the aisle of a food store, and you're wearing your Google glasses, and everything that's healthy for you, not for you, but for you.
That is cool.
Wow.
Yeah, that would be cool. And your cart or something, for example, you could even have a Connect type display or something on carts and stuff too, that actually direct you to where to go.
Yeah.
As long as the feedback mechanism wasn't too loud.
It's not for me, it's not for me.
Yeah, I'm buying this for my friend Joe. And I think the HIPAA thing was, there's some very smart comments around that. I would recommend a privacy aspect to this from the get-go, so that people who are participating are legally assured that while they are agreeing to share information, it'll be anonymous sharing.
Yeah, and I think that'd be critical, a FSMA certification or something, and also from health industries, because of the Medicaid. There's a lot of discussion about Medicaid and Medicare capabilities that we could actually allow those on Medicaid to actually shift into this pattern. And so having that government support and anticipating the need for the privacy, I think it's critical.
A lot of problems around the world.
Yes.
Germany and everywhere else. And that is pretty much it. So I do believe that, well, one more thing. So before we have the Google Glasses, and there's another way to do situational awareness, which would be to create, you're talking a lot about QR. People can certainly see that on a box, but you don't really know what that means. And it might be smart to have a marking that's uniform in color, if not anything else, and a minimum size of X. And it would indicate that this box is part of the program.
Yep. Yeah,
And
label.
you
a
could just
specific
walk with
label.
no glasses down the aisle, and the step one in the evolution of this whole process would be how many orange labeled boxes are on the aisle.
Right.
And then you could, as time goes by, you can develop the Google glasses and start getting much more done.
I love it. And also,
done.
when you get fruit and produce comes into the produce department, for example, there's the QR labels actually on the box
Yeah.
of produce.
Yeah.
So all the micronutrient analysis in the soil and all that stuff travels with the produce.
Yeah.
They go to put it on the shelf. That slips into that bin where the produce is. So that keeps changing with whatever bin you have. So you have very detailed information of the food that you're eating. And that, again, moves the industry to the right direction of organic, nutritious. So all of a sudden, crop farming doesn't become this mass production thing in the sense of, just throw fertilizers on it.
Right.
It's how have you treated the soil? And they're going to provide the micronutrients that we need.
Yeah. Now, we haven't touched today this issue, and it wasn't required, but as we talk, it occurs to me, one more thing occurs to me is the pricing issues. And it would be kind of interesting. Today we price based on either consumer or marketing to us, or if we're smart, I guess, our perceived health. What if we could price to health?
To some extent, that rebate is a
Yeah,
form
that's
of
right.
that.
It's a reverse pricing to health.
It's reverse pricing. So you don't want to penalize those, but you want to incent the right
Yeah.
behavior.
And if I were to buy, I'm looking at two different things, even if they both have QR labels, if I know that I'm buying this protein and it's got 20 amino acids in it and this only has 4,
Right.
then my price for the health of that product would be different.
That's right.
Yeah.
The only thing you can do today is, you go to yogurt or something like that, and it's like, well, this has so many cultures, and this one has, this has 4, this one has 8. Well, is
Yeah.
that going to be better for me? I mean, we have nothing, right? To be able to step forward and with confidence say, this is what this product has in it.
Yeah.
And then you can, the price differential is actually worth it because it makes me healthy, and I get a rebate for being
that's
healthy.
exactly right.
And now now it's a virtuous cycle.
It's not just a marketing gimmick. You actually are spending your money properly for your own benefit.
And this is going to provide a metric against which some of the new food sources are going to be measured. For instance, when tissue culture starts
Right.
coming in, when you start seeing some new kinds of ocean farming, new kinds of genetically engineered fish farming.
It's fed with algae as opposed to, corn and these
Well, I wish
types
we had
of
Craig Venter here because he was talking the first night about food design. He's very much into that, linking genomics with food design and making perfect foods. And the definition of what is a perfect food will have to include the work that you've done here.
It's exciting.
Yeah, it's very. Okay, A+.
All right.
Glad we approve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're technically out of time, but since I'm the boss, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to do a judo thing here. The time I'm stealing from belongs to people in this group who I think probably want to ask you questions or say something about this. So let's just try that. If there are questions or comments from the floor.
Oh, first off, let's thank the dozen or
community.
so of you who participated. This is our tradition
Right.
here.
Yes.
If those of you who were in the sessions, breakout sessions,
Yes.
and helped provide materials, could you please stand
Stand up. That would be great. I love that.
There were about
Send
half-
emails. I got lots of emails. You probably saw your stuff up on the slides. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Terrific.
Say your name.
Amory Lovins, terrific session. Let me just supplement Jerry's opening remark with this healthcare goal. It's to die young and happy as late and gracefully as possible without due burden.
Wow. That's great. That's a quote.
Simon Hackett. A couple of comments that maybe will help unless I'm missing something. I think you'll get a lot of resistance to putting QR codes on the labels, not because the industry thinks it's a bad idea, but because they want to protect the real estate on those packages pretty violently. But there's a piece of identifying data that's already there, of course, the barcode used for purchase. And it seems to me that that is sufficient. All you need is the cloud storing the data and a unique database key, and that is already on every product you buy in every one of those places today. You don't need the QR code. Usurp the barcode and use the cloud, and it's over, right? Store the data in the cloud.
And as long as we're assuming the cloud's always present.
Sorry?
We're making that assumption that the cloud's always present. The QR codes have information stored within them that's native to the code. So that was the only thinking behind that as a differential.
Yeah, I get it, but you only need a smartphone with the storage one's got today and a cache. And even if you're offline right now, if you're shopping for stuff you shopped for before, it's already in your device. And the other thing I'd say that I think excites me very much about this is the capacity to use the cloud to do that Amazon-style thing of, people like you, like this thing. In 10 years' time, if you're collecting that data and understanding what people are eating and how long they live, you get this incredible potential to say, people like you that made this modification lived 10 years longer. And you'll be able to make that observation not based on scientific analysis, but on observation of the entire population as the experimental data source. And that's really quite exciting.
That's great feedback.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So I was in the group, and the big revelation for me, the big idea was that so many of the solutions we talked about were dependent on industry and the data that they have, and the ambiguity around labels, ingredients, supply chain, et cetera. And it became clear that it would be so transformative to put that data right in the consumer's hand. What are the contaminants? What went into this? And that would change everything, I think. And everything else I see, solutions like, I think Simon's idea is pretty good, and that was my thinking, is you've got the data right there, but so much of what's important is withheld, or there are interests that would not want that data to be in the consumer's hand. And so if you have that lined with individual identity and genomics, and seeing what I'm about to eat, I think that would change everything, and not wait for governments or the companies to catch up. So
I think it's important to go back to Adam Smith, and that is the notion that whenever power accumulates that it is able to cheat, we're humans, it will cheat. And we're seeing that as a fundamental driver of culture war today. It's why science is being undermined in the public's mind. And Adam Smith's basic lesson, elucidated later by Ben Franklin, was find the powerful forces that can push back for you. Instead of having a revolution with pitchforks and torches, divide up the elites. And our allies in this are going to have to be insurance companies, employers.
Which is exciting when you think about that.
Yeah.
Actually having corporations and insurance companies want to participate, I think is a fundamental game changer in this one.
And they'll be the linebackers blocking our path forward.
Well, I don't know if you can have a revolution with pitchforks, but I think one with smart forks might work based on it.
Hi, Peter Vitulli. I want to come at it from a little bit different angle. You guys talked a little bit about the food industry, just touched on it. I've worked for many years for a large consumer products company, food company, and most of the time they are viewed as the enemy relative to solving these problems. And I think to really solve them and make this broader than a niche for people who are really focused on health and wellness, the food industry has to become that true partner. And there are two kind of obvious trends that have been around for a really long time but are very tough to solve. One, obviously, is convenience. If the food isn't convenient, it's just not going to get, not as many people are going to engage in it. But the other one, which is totally obvious, and that is if it doesn't taste good, people are not going to eat it. So from a technology standpoint, and trans fats is an example of that, really focusing a lot of the technology, because although we want people to eat natural foods, processed foods are still going to be part of what we do for a long period of time. Most people are eating those. So to really get broader representation, I think a lot of the technology needs to be focused on the hedonics. How do we make food that is processed, that may not be natural, but yet is healthier? And the only way, I think, from 16 years in the food business, it's going to be that food has to taste good. Because if the hedonics go down, it's just not going to get the broad engagement. So it's more of a comment than anything else.
So this is fascinating to sort of see and hear. Just a comment on if there was any social behavior that went into your thinking, because the perfect information doesn't necessarily apply to all of us, right? So when you look at individuals, how we behave, having the right information isn't necessarily the next step that we will do the right thing. The case that comes to mind is using the helmet, for instance. So everybody knows it's better to use a helmet, but you ended up having to have laws for people to protect their, me Inc. as they rode the motorcycle. Otherwise, they still wouldn't be doing it. How can we incent people more with maybe games or some other things, even if it's free, so that it actually becomes more effective versus we still eat the chocolate like we shouldn't?
Yeah, I think to a great extent is the investment in games. So as we identified in the learning and extending phases, that game would actually be an integral part of that. And so the reporting and there's an educational component to it, and then there's the reporting component to it, so that to participate and report yourself in and to use the tools that you get money, virtual money or credits in the game, so that you get rewarded for that. At the same time, there's an educational component to the game to educate people on what are the healthy things and the children, what have you, so they're making smarter choices. But yes, that the games would be part of the play that's being made, and that the corporations and the money that's collected by the corporations to build these games, because of the return that it gives them, and getting families, not just the parents, but the children as well. And there's a lot of moms and parents that want their kids to eat healthier, and this will help them, get them to move from the snack bar to the orange or to the grapes or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's key if we can.
I think what we're also seeing is, as with Netflix, as with Amazon, increasingly as with Facebook, who is the key influencer? And the key influencer is someone that you can relate to and you trust, right? So these trusted networks, among kids, amongst teenagers, they are starting to influence each other on, this is a smarter purchase, this is a better place to be at, and this is a better food to eat is coming on in spades. And I think if we try not to be big brother and say you got to eat better, but rather allow the network to understand itself and negotiate better outcomes, you'll automatically get that outcome.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think I think you were going there with this, is if the infrastructure provides you the game, it's very different than if you have to find the right game from 10,000 on an iPhone app.
That's right.
And if the infrastructure is your insurance company or maybe Medicare, and it just becomes part of how you live, your score that gets you money back or has you pay more, then I think that's pretty compelling. That's great.
Integration, yeah, key.
I think one of the most important comments that I heard was just now, which is the importance of the reliability of information. I think the public perception is that there's an awful lot of confusion and disagreement about what truth is. Is coffee good for you? Is coffee bad for you? Is chocolate good for you? Is chocolate bad for you? Et cetera, et cetera. And I think that having some sort of a neutral, non-government, and trusted source of truth is really a vital part of achieving what we would all like to see, because in a sense, everything else drives off of that information.
They used to be called journalism and science.
Well, here we're going to have a database. Who controls that database? Who owns it? Who judges what goes into it? And rejects things which look fraudulent and so forth. So
it's kind of the
there's
Wikipedia
obviously
for this.
Yeah.
Roger Payne, in terms of making things taste good so that you're inclined to eat them, there is an overwhelming success in that direction by International Flavors and Fragrances, who provide the tastes in all the fast food chains, I believe all by now, that make people buy stuff that you would probably not be able to choke down in some cases, and yet it's delicious and people buy it. I think that's one of the answers to this.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Well, great. I think we've done the feedback for everybody. I thank you all again. You've done a terrific job. It's pretty exciting.
It is exciting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.